Good afternoon. Welcome to the PACT lunch session, which is part of what we're developing as an indie toolkit on production insurance. I am Jules Robinson. I'm a business consultant for the nations and regions at PACT. And today in our session, we want to give you some insights and examples of good and healthy approaches to thinking about and managing insurance. In our session today, which will last up to an hour, we have Paul Hillier from Tysers and we have Richard Moore from Media Insurance Brokers. What we do is we hope to bring to life some of the kind of experiences and the learnings they have, and hopefully that'll be useful to you in the job that you're doing. I think it's important for us to kind of talk about insurance, given the last 12 months we've had, where clearly within the pandemic, it's shown how critical it is to the production industry. But I think it's important for us to really look at that, not just over the last 12 months, but going forward, what does that mean to us? So just to introduce our guests, so Paul Hillier is the Director of Film and TV Practice at Tysers, and he's been providing entertainment and film and TV insurance for over 15 years for companies such as Molyneux, Baby Cow, Screen Yorkshire and more, and TV productions, including The Inbetweeners, Gavin and Stacey, Killing Eve and Sherlock, all shows that I quite like. And Tysers is an insurance brokers that's been a specialist entertainment and sports division that employs over 180 people and provides insurance, and has been doing that for the TV and film world for over 25 years. And welcome to Richard Moore, who's a Managing Director at Media Insurance Brokers, who's been working for plus 25 years in the industry. Media Insurance Brokers have a specialist division for film and TV, and they have offices in London, Glasgow and Dublin, and they provide insurance for all aspects of the content production process, and they act for leading and international broadcasters and independent production companies. So thank you both for joining us today. Just before we launch into the first question, as a bit of housekeeping, there is a Q&A for those that are familiar with Zoom. Please ask any questions at any time. We will either take them directly as they come through, or we'll wait until the end to answer them as is appropriate. And we'll also be recording this session as well, which will be sent out to members and also made available on the PACT Growth Accelerator. So good afternoon to you both. Thank you for joining us. And maybe if I'll start with our first question, and I'll kind of go to you, Richard, if that's possible, and just ask, really, I think it's important for us to review a little bit of what's happened over the last 12 months, given what's happened to the production world, and really understand how has that affected the world of insurance, and what are your experiences?
Right, thanks a lot, Jules, and good afternoon to everybody. So over the past 12, 16 months, the insurance world has, to put it bluntly, had quite a kicking. Before we had COVID coming to March, the insurance industry was undergoing changes. Prior to that, we were in what was called a soft market, which basically means there's an awful lot of capacity available to insure the various risks that are required out there. This means that because competition is high, it drives prices down. At the beginning of 2020, a new EU directive called Solvency II came into play, which basically meant that the amount of business insurance companies could write, capacity, was directly related to the capital they had in the businesses. The important reason behind this is if everybody who's insured with an insurer all has a claim, they need to make sure the insurance company has enough money to pay out those losses. So this happened at the beginning of 2020, and what that meant is that many insurance companies couldn't afford to buy the capital they needed to write that amount of business, which therefore meant that they were reducing the amount of business they could write, and the business they could write, premiums were increasing because that cost of that capacity was getting more expensive. Also in January and February of last year, if you remember, we had quite some serious flooding in the UK, and the claims that we, at one point there, around about £350 million, which obviously has a direct effect on premiums. And then we hit COVID. So COVID it's something that the insurance industry hasn't seen before. That you could buy extensions to covers for pandemics, but it's one of those things which you go through the list of what's going to be covered, and everyone says, well, that's not going to happen, that's not going to happen. So it's one of those things that it will never happen. So not many people bought that sort of cover. Wimbledon did, as a matter of interest, and their loss was £114 million. So in came COVID, in came the claims. I think the figures are that the global insurance market will be hit to the tune of this is the middle of last year, they were saying it's $107 billion. And the total loss to the insurance market with the loss of capacity and investment and capital will relate to just close to 200 billion. So it's enormous. So what this has meant, obviously, is that we paid out an awful lot, or insurers, paid out an awful lot of claims. I mean, we had hundreds and hundreds of them happening. I'm sure Paul was exactly the same. And now we've come into the sort of 12 months on from that. Insurers are excluding cover for COVID. They're excluding cover for communicable diseases. And we're in a marketplace which is seriously retracting in size, where it's not necessarily always possible to get insurance full stop for the size of budgets that are required. As I say, you're not going to get cover as it stands at the moment to cover the COVID exposure. And prices are going up, and they're going up and up and up. And insurance companies are walking away from risks, which is something which we haven't really seen before. So previously, if you had a risk and there was something unusual or hazardous about it, you would get the underwriter would provide terms. They might have an increased premium or an increased deductible, but now they're just saying, no, not going to do it. A lot of people in the insurance industry, in the film and TV world, have lost their jobs. Insurance companies have stopped writing the business. Those companies that are still there have reduced their capacity and their appetite to write business. So it's going to be quite interesting for all of us for the next 12, 18 months.
Just on the point you've made about insurance companies not wanting to insure people for COVID, how would you advise a production company to protect itself given that environment, and what are they doing to give themselves some protection?
Well, I think where the insurers have stepped away from COVID, the government with the DCMS, with the PRS, has stepped in and done a great job, and that's open until the end of the year. I don't know if Paul's heard anything, but I don't know whether this is going to run into next year. If they've got any money left, I mean, they bid, what was it, 500 million was the size of the fund. The reason I guess they're still going is because they've still got some of that 500 left. But I think the key thing for it is production restart scheme. It's not production replacement sort of scheme. So there will come a point when it stops. So as long as it's there, production companies have got that protection. When it's not there, we hope that the vaccine, we hope that the testing protocols, and I think the big one that was announced, I think over the weekend, the government are doing tests now with the fact that if someone on your production, or it's not on production, they just talk about life in general, but if somebody contracts COVID-19, then at the moment, everybody who's in their bubble, it's down tools for 14 or 10 days, 14 days whilst you're testing. I think when we get to a stage where they say, okay, so Paul's in the same room as me, I've got COVID. If he tests every morning and he's clear, he can still go to work. I think that's what's going to make the biggest difference to everybody. And obviously the film and TV industry is if we don't have to say, okay, one person's got it, we all stop.
And Paul, is this what you're seeing the same thing? Is that how you've seen the market over the last 12 months?
Yeah, exactly that. As I was on a lot of calls mid last year about when insurance would be available before the government scheme was finalised, and the honest answer was we didn't know. No commercial insurers will offer COVID for a long time, and what were the options, and what can they do, what can they think about? So we had that big lull. But I think the government scheme was sort of the envy of the world really, where we've got this production sort of protector now that's getting people back into production. I'm quite keen, as Richard said, to see what the end of the year looks like. Obviously, at the moment, you've got to shoot till the end of October, but what happens in October is the fact the vaccine's coming in, the infections are going down. Is there going to be some options available, or people going to take the risk upon themselves, or will the government push it further? I think that's what we're all waiting to see, because when productions are getting to May, if you're looking to shoot towards the end of the year, you're starting to plan now, you're putting your finances together, and I think you really want that certainty to know there's something that's going to cover you if you have a bit of a down tools.
And so where do you both think this is going to take us in the next 12 months? And let's try and look beyond COVID as well, in where you think the dynamic will be in the insurance market and what people need to be looking out for.
Yeah, I think, as Richard touched on, in terms of lack of capacity, I think, a year, 18 months ago, if you had a 25 million, 30 million pound TV series, you would have 5 or 6 insurers maybe, biting your hands off to look at insuring it and wanting to take that risk on. Whereas now you've probably only got a couple of markets. And I think it's going to be a lot more sort of structuring of how you place policies. You're going to have like excess layers and shared risks, I think is one of the things that's going to come out of this for some of the bigger budgets. But in terms of actual, protection and insurance, I'm not too sure what's going to come in really. And I don't know if, commercial insurers, I don't see offering anything for a while. And if they do offer something, I think it's going to be quite small limits and quite high premiums. But other than that, I'm not really sure, Richard.
If you think back to, I think it was 2020 or 2020, or no, not 20, actually 2000, wasn't it? When was Foot and Mouth? Years ago, 15, 20 years ago. When that happened, they were, again, insurers picked up a risk they didn't expect to pick. I mean, we had the Cheltenham Festival, we insured that at the time. And because somebody put some sheep on a bit of land next door or something, the whole thing was called off. And the production policy, there was a communicable disease exclusion, it included foot and mouth, and that policy responded. Insurers then said, whoa, hold on a minute. This is what this policy wasn't intended to do. And a lot of stuff that you guys might have seen in the press, various insurers with the business interruption side, it was not about what the policy did or didn't cover, it was the intention. Well, either it's covered or it isn't, but that's what a lot of insurers were saying. So that exclusion went on the policy. Some people put it down as more specific. There are policies there, as I say, which say it excludes COVID. There's a policy out there for insurers which says excludes volcanic ash from Icelandic volcanoes. So they don't want to get hit with this pandemic again, or with this sort of situation. So I don't see there being a time in the very near future where any insurer will cover a business interrupt or an extra expense loss because of a pandemic, whether it's COVID-19, COVID-20, or COVID, or COVID-21. The other thing is that the policies that were in place, they weren't designed for this. So the civil authority or the imminent peril, which were the two, well, excluding cast insurance, obviously, if someone actually contracted COVID. But on the other end, the interruption side of it, which was, say, imminent peril or civil authority, they were always limited in the amount of cover they gave, whether it was 250,000 or $500,000, or it was a day, or it could have been 5 days worth of shooting, or 7 days. So when people had these losses or had all these interruptions, the policy wasn't really fit for, it wasn't fit for purpose because it wasn't designed to pick this up. So what you had was a lot of claims, and several, especially on, well, not just on dramas, but on a lot of claims where the claim was for X amount, but the actual loss to the production company or the broadcaster or financier was far, far greater than that. So it puts the whole industry in quite a difficult position because there's a crave for content. Everyone wants TV, of course they do, they want the content, but who's taking that risk? And if the government goes, I don't know whether it's going to mean I mean, at the moment, the government scheme's there. We've got the big studios coming in, making big budget productions. But are we going to see the sort of the UK broadcasters thinking, right, I can't afford to commit to 8 hours worth of TV, which is going to be a budget of 25 million or something, as Paul's mentioning. Really, the best thing I can do is go for something which is more nimble. So does that mean they'll be commissioning, one 90-minute special or 2 60-minute drama, or is it the sort of programming they commission until we're in a safe space? Is that going to change?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, sorry, Jules, we certainly found a lot of, studio-based shows started going through animations, anything where when the sort of lockdown was in its extremity, any dramas and scripted stuff struggle, but we did have a lot of these sort of like staged and, you know, the sort of Peter Crouch show on telly and animations, because they could carry on and they could abide by the regulations, but they managed to get their content out, and animations would, you know, weren't really affected too much. So I think people were very clever and nimble to put certain productions on their slate forward that maybe they were looking at the scripted stuff and they pushed that forward.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. That yes, so people are adapting to the adapting to what the risk is and the available insurance. The question that you brought up, Richard, which links to everything we had in the pre-conversation about risk management, about what your approach is, because you both had a very kind of positive view on what you should be doing about assessing risk rather than relying on insurance. Do you want to kind of bring that to life? And I know Paul,
yeah, sure,
spoke very specific about this, or one of you, yeah.
So, I mean, insurance is there when it goes horribly wrong. It's not to be relied upon. We go through all sorts of conversations with people on different productions and different shows and stuff. And it's not selling. I hate the word sell. I know we do sell insurance, that's our job, but it's not a sell game. It's not about, oh, buy one of these, buy one of those, it makes us lots of money. What we're looking at is protecting your exposure. And if we can go through the process of what you're doing, how you're doing it, how you're getting there, and it actually works out that, do you know what, we don't need to spend X amount of money for insurance because we know that if this happens, we'll do X, Y, Z. Yes, it might cost us more, but we'll put this money in a bucket and then potentially use that. Obviously, there's situations where you need to buy insurance, but it's not often the case. And I mentioned to both of you when we were talking about this before, I was at a barbecue one year and a guy came over to me and he said, oh, I understand you do the insurance for I'm a celebrity, you get me out of here. I said, yep, we do, we look after that. And he said, oh, my daughter's a researcher on it and she's testing all the games. So he said, you better have some good insurance in place in case a parachute doesn't open. And I said to him, well, to be honest with you, I'd be more concerned that the parachute opens than rather getting a payout if your granddaughter hits the tarmac. So that's kind of the thing, the approach to look at is to look at insurance as a last resort. So it is about risk management. It is about seeing of what you can do to prevent things happening. And a comment that we asked about recently is that when you send the risk assessments into your insurance broker, we'll look at it and try and highlight things that we think are potential exposure to your kit, your crew, your cast, etc. But what we do notice is that risk assessments have seemed recently to become very generic. And that doesn't really, I mean, I know you've got lots of things to do and you've got lots of risk assessments to issue, but if we did a risk assessment which says, you know, stunt double will be used when necessary, that doesn't really help us because we don't know when necessary is. So it's about sort of being as specific as you can when you're talking to your broker, because then we know that the camera is going to be on a sledge chasing someone down a toboggan, or they're going to be doing the parachute, or whatever they're going to do, and what those real potential exposures are.
Yeah, I mean, as Richard said as well, I think, you know, insurance, it's your safety net. It's not, you shouldn't rely on that to be your first port of call if something goes wrong. I think you look at it as a production, you manage the physical risks, the moral risks, the legally required risks, the RTA cover for motor, the employer's liability. And then you've got your contractual risks like your locations need liability cover, and you need your hired insurance for kit hire companies. And then you've got your production insurance, which obviously is, you know, broadcast and financier requirements, but also you can buy lots of different insurances. You can bolt things on. It's up to you what your appetite to risk is, whether you want to cover things like, you know, adverse weather and terrorism and political risks. There's a lot of suite of things that you can buy. And I think, as Richard said, if you engage your broker early on a project, we can tell you what's you know, recommended, what you say you have to have this, you definitely need this, but these are things that we also suggest you have. And I think we can then, you know, put together a proposal for you. And then it's down to you guys and your financiers and broadcasters and fellow producers to decide what you take out. And I think another thing we touched on is, you know, the budget doesn't dictate the risk. You know, we can have a 50 million, 30 million pound TV series or a feature film, and people go, oh, that's, you know, that's risky. There's lots of claims there. But actually, if you have a low budget, I don't know, inexperienced producers making a feature film, or you get people going on a hazardous sort of hostile territories documentary with tiny budgets, they're bigger risks than the actual, you know, big production sometimes. So I think it's really important to engage with your brokers early and get a broker that, you know, knows their stuff and, you know, isn't, you know, just an online sort of one size fits all, because, you know, every production is different. I think it's really important to talk to people about risk management.
And do you have any good examples of where it is paid off to have the insurance? I mean, can you bring that to life with some stories here?
Loads of stories. Well, I mean, you know, anything can happen. So, you know, you look through your whole list of insurances, and something Paul's mentioning, quite a good thing about production insurance is when you buy it, you basically start with a package, and that package will cover the majority of the risks that you will encounter when making a TV show. But it's as I say, it's as long as a piece of string of things that happen. I mean, we've had cast insurance, which is the big one, or the sort of the top of the game, which is insuring the individual. So that's the case, they've become ill or they're involved in an accident, and the impact it has on the budget. So, you know, that can be on a documentary, which we had one where they were filming in Nepal, and it was in a remote location, and they covered the director, the producer, and the camera person, and the camera person broke the leg, and it took them a week to get back from where they were, then for the helicopter to fly them out and take them back, get a new camera person in, and go back again. So that was an accident. That was a cast loss, and the reason the camera went under was because the fact that it was under the cast insurance was because of the fact that the location and where they were filming. Whereas if you're filming a documentary about pubs in Soho, then if your cameraman doesn't turn up because they're ill, then the chances are, well, maybe not now because everyone's so busy, but you can get one pretty short notice. The other extreme on that, of course, is on in dramas and feature films. Is, you know, when the lead is taken ill, it's not a case of well, there are certain people that everything stops. If it's the lead, if they're in 90% or 80% of the filming and they're taken ill, and it very, very quickly runs up to being big amounts of money. And then you have, I don't know, we had a hippopotamus bite a boat in half and equipment claim for that. We had a a lion jump on the back of a flatbed truck and take a camera and run off into the bush, and the cameraman chased them, which is fair enough. And we got it back. We don't recommend that, but that's what's happened. We had to insure a man who was eaten by a snake. That was quite interesting. You know, anything that happens can happen. Yeah, it does. The thing which I've noticed over the years I've been doing this, the big difference is that we used to get claims come in and sort of a bit of a sort of emoji. That doesn't happen so much. It's accidents. It's things that weren't planned, that were outside the control. Everyone did everything they could. That, I think, is sort of is credit to the professionalism of the industry and how it has got, you know, better and better and better over the years. When I first started doing this, some of the losses you would just think, seriously, but you know, you never know what can happen.
And I think also when something does go wrong, I think it's really important to contact the broker early and talk to us about what's gone wrong, because as Richard said, these policies have all got sort of extensions of cover, and sometimes you have to have a certain set of circumstances for it to trigger that section. So if you do something this way, if you don't phone the police before acting, or you don't do a certain thing, it might prejudice your claim. So I think it's really important to actually speak to a broker and then, you know, loss adjusters before stuff gets too far down the line. You tend to lose control of the claim, and I think it's really important sometimes just to make sure that specific policy section is triggered.
We always say act as if you're uninsured. It's your own money, and that just work on that premises. If you work on that premise, the fact that, you know, if you're uninsured, so what will you do to keep costs? What do you do to mitigate costs? As long as you do that, then the chances are that, you know, the claim will go through.
And I think
yeah.
Sorry, Jules, another thing where, as Richard touched on, some of the risk assessments get quite generic. I've been asked a lot in the last 6 months or 9 months about, you know, COVID measures and how many COVID supervisors should we have? How many, you know, this person's gone down here. How much testing should we do? What should we be doing for COVID protocols and to meet the guidelines? And I think insurers, like anything, whether it's stunts or COVID or whatever, but they're not the experts. They don't know how many tests you should do. They don't know your production. They rely on the expertise of your COVID supervisors, your health and safety team, your stunt teams. They're the ones that should put the information and detail into the risk assessment and the protocol documents for them to effectively review and sign off. They shouldn't be recommending, and they won't recommend, that you have more COVID supervisors or you do a stunt a certain way. That's not what they're there for. They're there to sort of agree and note the documents that you send to them.
And it's their starting point. It's like a workflow. So again, same things Paul's saying. It's not a case of whether you have 3 copies, 4 copies, or how many copies. The fact is, and they're looking at the risk assessments, they're looking at the workflow document, and they go, okay, fine. So they do understand how the industry works. Of course they do, otherwise they couldn't underwrite it, but not obviously to the detail that people within it do. So they can see, well, that looks all right, that looks all right. Okay, so they're doing that, they're doing that. And then if there is an incident, then they'll refer back to that. So it's okay, so what went wrong? So if they go in the risk assessment and it says that the lead actor was going to drive 30 meters in the car, going to a speed of 50 miles or speed of 20 miles an hour, then stunt double took over and off they did the crazy stuff. That's what they underwrote. So, okay, fine, we like that, we haven't got a problem. But if it turns out that the actor was in the car and drove the full length, doing all the stunts, all the twists, all the turns, handbrake turns, everything, and the car turned over, then they're going to have, obviously that will be a bit of a potential problem, or it will be a problem.
So yeah, and you've kind of started to kind of lean into this a bit. So at what point should someone contact you guys to then start to engage with it, what their insurance strategy should be?
I'd say it's never too early. I mean, literally, quite often historically, people would get in touch with you when they've got the finance together, they're starting pre-production fairly soon, and they need the policies in place and they want to start closing. I think it's never too early. I think if you've got an idea, a development project, a bit of money, you want to do recce's or talk about a certain country that you're going to look to film in, if you speak to your broker, speak to Richard, speak to me, if you speak to a broker that's been in the industry for a while, they can probably give you some fairly good intel in terms of maybe some people they might put you in touch with who shot somewhere similar, or some issues they found with a certain tax credit or a certain way of doing insurance or something like that. I think it's really important to get in touch with people as soon as you can.
Yeah, you need you need to know what information to get, so that you don't ring us. Well, you can ring us on Fridays, but the worst call is Friday afternoon when you're in the airport, which obviously is a place that we used to go to with a thing called planes. But the airport saying, right, I'm going to do this. I mean, we had a call, or I had a call on Monday about someone about to get into a plane to do a shot there. Now that would have been okay. We managed to get things resolved. But if you can give us a lead in time, then we can go through with you what you need to do and what we need to see. And as I say, especially if you're going on overseas locations, and especially on documentaries, it is always good, the planning, to see what's possible, because then when you're going into that and you're going in with the budget and you're trying to get the budget signed off by your commissioning editor or whatever, then the point is that if you know at that stage, okay, so the basic insurance is going to cost me £100, but I need kidnapper and ransom. I need something extra for it, so I'm going to hire a boat. And then those costs are in the budget early on, and there's no surprises. And you've also talked it through. And you also then can have that conversation. Okay, so we're going to film in Thailand, and we're going to use the locals with the boats. Now, the boats don't have insurance, so that's fine. We know that. We've got this, which isn't this insurance cover isn't the best thing out. But when you're talking to the financiers, the broadcaster, you've got that in there that we potentially have this exposure. We know what it is, and it's a decision that can be taken whether or not it's something you want to take on.
And also, when you've got these overseas shoots, there's all these, depending where people are filming and how sophisticated the local markets are, you've got these extra, motor cover, general liability, employer's liability. Some countries don't have employer's liability. They have workers' comp, or they have nothing, or it might be personal accident they use instead. I mean, Richard would be the same. We review a lot of local policies where we're covering the overarching production policy, and a fairly sometimes inexperienced local broker might say, this is what we want to put together. And the limits are really tiny compared to what we have as, sort of standard limits here. And I think it's trying to sometimes improve them and suggests something that's a bit of a go-between, that's a blanket cover on our policy, but actually theirs covers the necessary, but to a higher limit than maybe they're used to sometimes.
Yeah, and you have to fit in, I think, Paul saying, you have to fit in with the local cases, because there's no point having a policy which is based in you're filming in Egypt, And if you've got a policy which has got a UK courts jurisdiction clause on it, which basically means if one of the Egyptian hires is injured, they've got to go and take a case against you in the UK courts. Well, that's not going to work. I mean, it's illegal for starters, but the point is it doesn't work. And the same for you if you're hiring crew in the UK, you shoot in the UK and you've got a US policy which has got US clauses on it. Well, that doesn't work for you either, because again, you're not going to be able to, if there is a case, it needs to be in the local courts where the people are hired and people live.
Okay, well, I'm going to field a question that we've just been posted through, and the question is, what insurance is paramount? Cast and crew and/or equipment insurance, for example. So this is someone coming from a startup of an indie. So what would you advise them as a paramount as a starting place?
Well, you need to have your liability covers. If you're filming out and about in a location, you'll need to have public liability. That's, I mean, the minimum I would suggest you take is 5 million. You really should be looking at 10, and I mean, I don't want to go into too much, well, bore you with too much detail. But the long and short of it is there's a way that they calculate personal injury payments, and that's just gone up. So basically what it means is that they're expecting personal injury payments for people that are injured to be higher. So a lot of people are now recommending that you buy 50 to 20 million pounds worth of public and employers liability. The other important one is employers liability. You have to have that if you're employing people. And if you're hiring equipment, you'll need equipment hire, because otherwise they won't give it to you to cover the value of the equipment, and you'll need loss of hire as well. That I would suggest is the absolute basic package of insurers. That won't cover the content you're filming. That won't cover any knock-on effects, because the fact that you're one of your cast members or one of the sort of director of is taken, that won't cover motor, it won't cover props, it won't cover cash, it won't cover office. But for a startup, you need the liability to go and be allowed to film in places. You need the equipment to get the kit. Excuse me.
Yeah, and one of the other areas, and Paul, you mentioned this, we're talking about the kind of onus on productions to manage their own sort of health and safety and COVID protocols and sort of the broader risk management. So, you brought this up as a topic about the responsibility back on the production to manage these.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you, depending what size your production is, whether you're a short film or a big feature or a TV series, you have heads of department for a reason. They're the guys that filter down the responsibilities. And as you say, they've got to take responsibility for the risk management of the production, whether it's health and safety or whether it's, security or whether it's, cast and crew well-being, whatever it is. I mean, the well-being thing, the sort of mental health of cast and crew now is a really huge thing, obviously. And yeah, the responsibilities are the productions to deal with, and I suppose they can get input from us about it, but I think really it's a production's liability to make sure that's all in place.
And if we look at kind of specific kind of policies that there are certain policies you said or areas that need a bit of kind of deeper digging, particularly, for example, we talked about the motor insurance aspect and things like kind of adverse weather. So do you want to give some examples of approaches?
Yeah, motor's a really key one, I think, because on most productions, generally speaking, certainly the scripted stuff, you'll have an element of motor, and whether that's static vehicles, sort of dressing vehicles for period things like all the midwives sitting there in the street just not moving, or whether it's people driving them, or whether it's action or stunts or tracking. And there is most production policies will cover the physical damage to the actual equipment. If there's an accident or something happens and they're damaged, it covers that. But there does tend to be this little bit of a grey area in terms of liability. If it's a public highway, it's quite obvious that you need Road Traffic Act motor liability cover to place alongside your package. If you're shooting in a studio or private land, obviously that doesn't tend to apply. You can usually rely on the vehicle damage and the public liability. You do get quite a lot of instances where there's a controlled road or a road that's being used that's not fully under your control. There might be some public liability exposure as well, where you should have Road Traffic Act cover. I think sometimes that's something that you maybe need to discuss with the Transport Police or whoever you've arranged your production with, what actual insurance you need. And I think it's something that comes up quite often. And people using their own cars, runners using their own cars, and people on lower budget stuff, try to work on, you know, they've got vehicles, they've got a limited budget. How do they make sure they've got the right sort of cover, and can they bring cars to production? Can they take kit? And that comes up quite often with us.
And you mentioned the topic of disgrace as well. I think you just explain that and explain kind of example.
Yeah, it's an interesting, it's quite a topical time to speak about this, because there was a big case last week where, I mean, historically, death and disgrace cover would be more of a commercial producers ad campaign. If you've got a big famous name that's doing all of your print and your screen advertising, and you spent a lot of money on this guy or this girl, and they do something that basically disgraces themselves, and then you have to pull the whole campaign, that would be something you buy quite often in campaigns. After the Harvey Weinstein, the Kevin Spacey stuff, there was a bit more of an appetite for disgrace cover, and certain insurers started offering it either as an add-on to their policies or standalone. And I think, as Richard can probably confirm, I think there's one of the schemes in the UK does cover maybe one disgrace per production possibly, but I think certainly we'd offer it, and we talked about it quite a lot, and I thought it would be quite a big take up off the back of the Kevin Spacey and all the money in the world production, because obviously that was the production's own pocket they had to recast. But off the back of the news last week, whether people will again look at their exposure, because there was a few productions were pulled last week off the back of this latest news. So is that something people are going to look at again, or have they not really got it in their budget, or do they have to do a bit more due diligence into casting and who they're working with?
Just to jump in there on death and disgrace, I mean, as you quite rightly say, it started in the commercial world, and the big one was Michael Jackson. But Michael Jackson was the ambassador for Pepsi Cola, and the first time he was accused of bad behaviour, I think they pulled that, and it was, Paul's drinking a Pepsi, look at that.
I just thought I was going to do that then.
So he wasn't affected. I think the claim, like $20 or $30 million, or maybe a bit more than that, was the biggest claim. But death and disgrace is people talk about it. Things to mention about death and disgrace is, first of all, most policies, you have to be convicted. So all these policies, all this bulletproof, Noel Clarke, we know what we're talking about, that's been pulled. Now, whether they have or they haven't, death and disgrace is neither here nor there. But until he is or isn't convicted, that policy doesn't respond, because there has to be a conviction. We had a death and disgrace where an individual was accused of something. The production was halted, and it was it was about a year or so later before the individual went to court and was convicted, and the policy paid out. The things that, I mean, there was a band that we insure, and they were about to do, I think it was the Sony Awards a few years ago, and this is what the big problem we're in at the moment. And one of the individuals was accused of inappropriate behaviour, and it turned out to be an angry fan. But in the course of that, and there was no case to answer, but during the period of that, they'd lost a lot of gigs. They lost a lot of business. There was a production a couple of years ago where one of the cast was accused of something. 2 shows were stopped. One of them reshot. They didn't have death and disgrace cover, so because the financiers said we can't have this person in. It was reshot, and a very significant cost of millions to the broadcasters and the production company. And the other show they were involved was put on hold. No conviction, again, no case to answer. So it's quite it's quite a very delicate and tricky area to get into. So if you are, all I'm saying is, if you are into, people do want to buy death and disgrace, I really think it's a waste of money, to be honest with you, on the production TV world. It costs a fortune. You're talking about, 5, 10, 15% per person of the rate. And the way the policy wordings are written, you'd be lucky, unless it's a slam dunk, then, you can have trouble. And the other thing to remember about this cover is it's anything outside their normal behavior. So if this individual is well known for being found at 5 o'clock every morning drunk in a gutter somewhere, or doing something, that's their normal persona. So that's not death and disgrace. That's that's what they do.
I'm just going to follow up on the first question we had, and the follow up would be asking a bit more about the specifics about having local intel and information, and specific to location. So how do you understand what the right approach should be around a specific location, and how you'd advise them to go about assessing that?
Well, some insurers, there's one in particular, have a very, very good travel and personal accident department. And if you're going to film in a location, you basically tell them, obviously, and they will give you quite a comprehensive report about that area, which will help also. I mean, it's basic things, you know, it's roads, it's about transport, it's about getting around, it's about, because we had a show which was a light entertainment show, and they were going to film at a location, and they needed to have, they had some form of, or they had medical insurance for in the event that somebody contracted COVID. But the insurer said, we're not going to do it. They ran this report in the area. They said, because the hospital infrastructure is so poor that you might be on this, it was a sort of like a beach, you know, desert island type show. But the infrastructure is so poor that if someone gets it, there's nothing we can do about it. So that's the sort of intel they'll give you. So you say, well, okay, so I'm going to go and film in a war zone, or I'm going to go and film in somewhere where there's a conflict. Great. Now the insurance company can get you from here. They'll fly you out from there. You've got to talk to the army or to the local militia or whoever you're filming with, because they can't get you from here to here because it's a war zone. So these are the sorts of things that come in. They'll tell you about, you know, whether, as I say, just the general communication on what you can and cannot do, what's available, whether plasma is available, whether you should take your own, whether you should even go or not. Because again, that's not a case to rely on the insurance. That's a case to think, well, actually, can we physically go in? And you know, and is it safe to film?
We had a situation like Richard said in terms of the 24/7 medical services providers that a lot of these travel guys have. We had a crew member went down, I think, get a stroke because he was landing somewhere in Africa, and it was a really key conversation with the 24/7 providers and the producers about which which hospital he went to for his, you know, to be treated as best he could be, because I think something like a stroke is so key that you get urgent treatment and the right treatment. And I think they had a list of hospitals within probably an hour where they were coming into, and they flew him to a certain place to make sure he got the right treatment and then to get repatriated back. So I think they would have that insider knowledge on all of these countries and hospitals and what you should be doing and when.
From personal experience of dealing with these travel providers, if you get your AA online direct type insurance, the services they have, they're actually, they subcontract them out. So that what happens is that individual will get the cheapest price or flight back or whatever. We're not talking about, you know, obviously Medivac, we're just talking about generally getting people out. So they'll go for the cheapest possible, which isn't necessarily the best possible for your situation. And when it happened to me, I did it all myself, because the options I was being given by these guys who are just basically travel agents was just ridiculous. So, you know, you need to be talking to insurers that they insure people in high-risk areas. They know what it means. They know what Medivac is. They know what the country is, and the fact those procedures, you know, those things aren't there. You can't go from here to here, you know. And they're specialising in just in getting you out. Simple as that. But the pre-information, they'll, you know, as I say, some of these insurers will provide a service and they'll give you chapter and verse about what to expect. And I know you'll have researchers and working locally for you and local fixers, but you know, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to have a second opinion.
And yeah, one of the things we briefly discussed as well was about stunts and about, you know, looking at how you can insure against stunts. How do you evaluate that? How do you approach that?
Well, I think that goes back to the risk assessments again, and I think, and also the early information, the early breakdowns that you get. I think, you know, the more information you can have when you submit an application to an insurer around the stunts that are going to be taking place, and then as the stunts become closer, special effects, whatever it is, that the carriers like special effects men have got their own public liability insurance. Something again that came up fairly recently is about stunt coordinators themselves having public liability. A couple of insurers asked us about this, and they tend to have their own personal accident insurance with BEC2 or equity, and a lot of them don't actually carry their own public liability. I don't think it's an industry standard that you have to have that. I don't know if Richard's found the same or not in terms of stunt coordinators and PM.
We've had a coordinator sued.
Okay.
That was a stunt, and they were going through a load of load of barrels in a lorry, and the fire was supposed to be yay big, but they put bags of gasoline this, and the fire was yay big, and various people got burnt. So yeah, that can happen. The thing about stunts is don't let your cast get involved. I mean, unless your name's Tom Cruise, and you can do what you like, then don't. I mean, there's no, you're putting someone who's not trained into a situation. I know actors do. There's one in particular who we do some work with, who loves driving cars quickly, and insist on doing all their own work in their own cars. But it's not about what the individual wants to do. I mean, I think when Tom Cruise busted his ankle, I think it was about $30 million loss. But it's not just about that one person, because it's the whole pyramid effect. It's the fact that if that person at the top of the tree goes, there's everyone down below who has to wait while they get mended, while they get repaired. It impacts on all those lives. Yes, there are certain things that you can do. If you can drive in a straight line, you can do things, and there's choreography for fight scenes, and there are certain people who are very fit and very healthy and agile and do fight training. And yes, you get all that information and can do it. But we've had people jumping off a wall about a foot tall and busting their ankle, or putting a hamstring because they haven't warmed up to run. And it's, it happens. Yes, we know it has to happen, but just try and limit it. Keep it as limited and controlled as possible. I mean, there's so much now with these LED screens. I know they cost a fortune, and if we're talking startups, you're not going to get them. But there is so much that you can do to give the impression that people are doing. I think one of the first claims I ever had was a little boy, I don't know, he was 10, 12 or something, he was sitting on a horse, and the horse shied away slightly, he fell off and busted his collarbone. He didn't even move, for goodness sake, when he fell off. But then you've got other people who are very accomplished with horses, and they can do what they like, because they have that skill. They have as much skill as the double would have. But then, you've got to look at it and say, well, do we really want to risk the lead, or do we really want to risk this person, riding around on a horse when we don't need to have them on it?
Yeah, you'd be amazed actually the amount of sort of accident reports we get that a stunt, literally a punch scene or someone headbutting someone's scene, and the stunt coordinator themselves have been hit. They haven't judged the distance right, or someone's got a chipped tooth from a headbutt or something where, they've rehearsed it and then the action's taken place and they've gone too far and hit them. And obviously if that was a cast member, you've suddenly got a black eye or chipped tooth, and it's not going to go down very well with the production or the insurers.
We had a production which will remain nameless, did several series, and it was a very young cast. And they always got very carried away, and the amount of bloody noses. And we had someone got in a situation where the individual got carried away and he broke the other person's ribs. I mean, it's crazy, but it happens.
We're all trying to guess what that is now. Look, some brilliant insights. We're kind of going for sort of 50 minutes now. I'll ask anyone else who's listening, if you want to submit any questions, this is your last chance to do so. So just finally for me is we talked a bit about, the future, well, what's happened over the last 12 months, where we think it's going as the future. Any other kind of final insights would be interesting as to, these are the things you should consider.
Well, what I hope, sorry jumping in there, but what I hope is there's a thing called Pool Re, which was introduced to insure terrorist attacks in this country, and that was set up because nobody would do it. And there's a thing called Flood Re, which is exactly the same reason. But then over the years with the terrorism insurance, it's got to a stage where the risk has become more manageable as far as insurers are concerned, and therefore insurers they will write the insurance themselves. The Pool Re thing, the government basically does it. So my hope is that in the not too distant future, there's a pandemic re starts up, which will be a basically government-backed facility, which will insure all pandemics. And then as we get more control of these things, hopefully the insurance world will come back in and start doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. I think it would be a great thing to see. I think the only thing that when I've talked to people about, the Pool Re, the Flood Re is, I think with the pandemic, it came from nowhere and hit the whole world equally. There was productions in the US and the UK with flooding, with terrorism. It was always quite, regional. It would be an attack in London. It would be something. So I think it is a solution. Hopefully, I think it's the way it's going to go. But as Richard said, I think it's hopefully people will have it as a government, as a pooling of resources at some point, but then it will come in where you'll be able to buy it, in the same way you bolt on terrorism, you bolt on pandemic insurance, or you don't. It's up to you whether you take it or not. There's lots of insurance you can buy. Just quickly touching on one we didn't really talk about is adverse weather. Comes up sometimes. People say, I'd like to buy weather cover, for shooting in April in London for not having rain or something. And usually you can put people off by saying it's, 30% of your budget for the day or some hideous. In 15 or so years, I've had one or two that have gone ahead past a sort of an indication in terms of weather cover. And it's just not something that I think really translates to this world. I think it's more commercials and ads. It doesn't seem to be that good a value for money, really.
No.
Well, yeah, thank you both for taking the time. I think there's some brilliant insights there. I think we've got a good sense of what's happened with COVID, effectively the redesign of insurance that's available now on the back of that. You talked about the production restart scheme, which I think is great. I think most people are very aware of. As you say, it'd be interesting to see where that goes from an ongoing point of view. Also about the working with brokers, the kind of key is there's no sort of off-the-shelf solution here. You need to go in and talk to people and find out specifically about what you need and what your production is looking to achieve to be able to evaluate risk. So risk management, you both said a lot about constantly looking to see where your exposure is and then trying to figure out then where you might need insurance to follow up on that. You talked about the risk assessment workflow, which I really like the idea of, that constant idea of where is that risk, but also trying to get in early. So when you're in pre-production, trying to kind of understand what your risk is to be able to manage what you're able to do ongoing. And then, I'll just see if another question has come in. No, just someone saying thank you. And then the final thing that I really liked is clearly if you've got a truck, don't leave your camera on there because a lion might jump on it and take your camera, which is still the living memory of, I don't think you can predict that from an insurance point of view, that a lion might steal your camera. So, but both to you, Richard and Paul, thank you for taking the time today. Some brilliant insights. Someone has just asked another question of, what should they do to understand what insurance they should have? I think the advice here is try and speak to a broker who will give you an understanding of where your risk is and what the approach could be. So unless you guys have anything else, thank you for your time. Really great insights. And yeah, thank you again. Thank you everyone for listening.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.